Hi everyone, my name is Charlie, and although it is spring, today I thought I would dress properly for winter. Like literally, I either look like I'm about to attend some sort of spoken word poetic performance or go on a hike up Snowdonia. I don't know. Either way, today I have a tag for you. It's been a while since I recorded any form of tag video, but today we have the Canterbury Tales book tag. I was tagged by Emily of Noval Novels, who has tagged me more times than the bins outside of Tesco. The tag was created by AJ of AJ Dunn Reads and Writes, whose channel is brilliant, and I'm ashamed that I didn't know about this tag before Sunday. I have spent quite a long time collating answers to these questions, and
a few moments later.
The dog has knocked down my tower of books, but we will get into this video. There are 26 prompts for this tag. Each one of them corresponds to another tale from the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, a book of which I read sections for English literature almost 14 years ago. 13? I don't know. It doesn't matter. It was over a decade ago. And also, there are quite a few new faces here. Please do not be put off by this very gruff, grumpy northerner. I am just the same as you, only more handsome with better hair. A lot of you have come over from Ben of Doom Antidote's channel, and that's very kind. I was very grateful to receive that shout out on his video. I was very glad to see that because it reminded me that people definitely have no taste if they are recommending me to anybody. Firstly, I would also just like to note that that was sarcasm. I'm aware that some people are able to notice that, but others are not, which is one of the ways that I once ended up causing a volunteer to dump an entire box full of CDs into a skip. A lot of talk of trash today. Might be because in looking for these books for this video, I ended up uncovering mounds and mounds of dust, which reminds me that I actually need to start reading the books on my shelf so that dust could not accumulate in such a fashion. So, prompt 1. The host is the character who relates to the tales to the reader. He is large, loud, and merry. I recommend a Mammoth book over 800 pages. So this was originally for March of the Mammoths, but we're in May now. And the book that I'm going to recommend is The Books of Jacob by Olga Karczyk, translated by Jennifer Croft. Kieran was worried that I would stop putting out content in which I mention this book. And do you want to know something? I am not going to stop talking about this book. This book was 892 pages and cost me nearly a month of my life. If you don't think that I am going to milk this for every single bit of its worth, then you don't know me at all. So this book is an epic novel that chronicles the life of Jacob Frank, this religious leader from the 1700s, somewhere over in Eastern Europe. Arrives in a village in Poland. Well, he doesn't just linger in Poland, you know. He travels all over the place. He gads about like I don't know what. And he flits from religion to religion as this kind of epic, debauched time as he goes round trying to get everyone to follow his ways. It's a bit spiritual. It's a bit mystical. You gotta take your time with it. It's full of characters whose names are going to change throughout the novel. If you don't like slow-moving books, then you're going to get a bit pissed off with this one. But honestly, enjoyed it. And there are some bits that move faster than others. It also cost me 20 quid, so that's another reason to keep talking about it. Next we have The Knight. Stands for Fighting, War and Bravery. Recommend a book with a courageous main character. Well, here, I thought, I read a lot of fantasy. I could recommend a fantasy novel here. But I didn't. I went for Elsa. out of My Grandmother Sends Her Regards and Apologises by Frederick Buckman. Now, let us find the translator. Is there a translator? Translated from the Swedish by Henning Kosh. Elsa views her grandmother as a superhero. And her grandmother is living with them. She has grown ill. And she gives Elsa all of these notes to take around to various people. And in doing so, she is helping Elsa realise that there is a place for her in the world, even if her grandmother is no longer in it. This book deals with childhood grief, and is a book that I was reading in a coffee shop once and had to put down because I thought this is a scene that I cannot read in public. Because, frankly, I did dispose of emotions many years ago, but sometimes they do come back to bite me. I'd call Elsa courageous because despite her grief and despite her fear of the world around her, she goes through the world viewing it through her grandmother's stories, and that's how she pieces the world together, through the fairy tales that her grandmother tells. And then as she goes through life, she begins to recognise that there are characters within her life who her grandmother has fictionalised. And Elsa has this courage to not overcome her grief, because it's too short of a book to do that, but to acknowledge that you can still move through life whilst holding this space for your own grief. Despite being so young, she goes and she acknowledges these people that her grandmother might have wronged, and she starts to bring them all together. And yeah, just a fantastic book with a rather fantastic, resilient character. Then we have The Wife of Bath stands for Marriage, Sex and Arguing. Tell us about a book with a strong female character. The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb features a character that I have often called one of my favourite female characters in fiction, because in the first book of this series, I despised Malta Vestrit. I wanted her cut out of the series. I did not want to have to cope with another 2 books in which this character featured. However, the journey that Hobb takes this character on takes her from this very petulant daddy's girl in the first book into becoming this very human, empathetic woman throughout the series. And I then end up having read the entire series now, and looking back at Ship of Magic, it changes my opinion of the character. It changes my opinion of the way in which Robin Hobb is crafting characters and the journeys that she is taking them on as a writer. She is showing that people have the ability to change, but also that whilst we might villainize characters and with our opinions of readers when we are presented with a character in a certain fashion, we will gain certain beliefs of them. What we also have to accept and consider is the way in which these characters came to gain those beliefs in the first place. And that gives a different aspect to the villainy of other characters. And the way that Malta Vestrit changes as a character, but also who she is as a character, the fact that she accepts who she was and still managed to grow from it, makes her one of my favourite female characters in fiction. And when I was looking through my journal of books that I've read today, I was surprised to see that I read this book 6 years ago, because it has stuck with me for so long and has been a mainstay of a series that I recommend to people. And I do intend to reread one day, but I was really shocked that it had been 6 years because of the moments that come back to me from this series and the adoration that I still feel for that main character. Then we have The Pardoner is all about ambiguity. Tell us about your favourite queer character. And luckily it said characters, because I had a struggle here. I ended up pulling books off my shelves, trying to think. I was wondering about Box Hill by Adam Mars Jones, but couldn't find that. And also, did we like that book, or did it just feature a lot of sex? Did want to mention A Crown for Cold Silver by Alex Marshall, because I mean to continue this series, but this series, everybody seemed to be queer. Everybody. They don't care who you're harem. Dramatic, fast-paced, and anyone would have sex with anyone. I mean, attraction did come into it, but Then we have Patsy by Nicole Dennis Benn. Both Patsy and True are showing different aspects of what it means to be queer in the worlds in which they inhabit. I was also considering Romanza in this One Sky Day, which is a book that I only just read. And then we have Rainbow Milk by Paul Mendes that features the character of Jesse McCarthy and whose journey explores the relationship between sexuality and religion. See, I'm still blaming AJ for the mess that has been made of my shelves for this video, but I was determined. You don't have to answer every single one of these 26 prompts, but I was determined to have a go. The Miller is bold, blasphemous, and overturns conventions. Who is your favourite naughty character? Rikus from the Spellslinger series by Sebastian de Castell is a squirrel cat who wants to tear out the eyes of his enemies and eat them, but also has an obsession with, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's some sort of carbohydrate. And yeah, he is this witty side character that provides comedic relief to this series, as do many of the characters in this actually. I almost included Therius Parthax, especially with this next, a later question about unconventional characters. But because Therius has now got her own series, it didn't feel like I ought to do that. But Rikus, yeah, he is naughty, he is villainous, but he's charming. But he's also a squirrel cat. The Prioress is modest, quiet, and compassionate. Recommend a book you don't hear much about on BookTube. Again, I have two for this. I don't know where I'm going to go, but I've taken them both off my shelves. The first is Brixton Beach by Roma Tern. This one I'm mentioning because it's a book that I first read 11 years ago. And whenever I go through my shelves and I cull them regularly, I unhaul regularly, this is one that remains. It evoked Sri Lanka in such a way that I don't think I'd experienced with other writers before, as being able to evoke the country and the tension and the ways of the people who inhabit said country. It also dealt with the impact of the 2005 bombings in London, which when this book was released were in recent memory. It becomes one of those things that it's a book that discusses how, despite having order within your life, something within the world can come and tear that away at a moment's notice. I talked about this with The Sentence by Louise Erdrich recently. I don't recall much about this book other than Alice, the protagonist, being rather arty, and also the lyrical prose that was very beautiful and visual and vivid. And no matter how many times I go and I look at this book and I think, you can't really remember much about it, I can remember taking this book everywhere with me and just sitting and reading it and being enveloped by the prose. And whenever it comes to that moment of thinking about unhauling this book, I'll open it and I'll read a section of it and I'll think, no, that is too beautiful of a piece of writing not to have on your shelves. And it's definitely one that I ought to get around to rereading. And the other book that I had to mention for this is Annabelle by Kathleen Winter, because I've never been able to get the sticker off. I don't know whether it shows up on the screen, but there is sticker damage here. And this discusses an intersex individual who is raised as Wayne, but always feels as though there is a more feminine aspect to their life. But they have a father who wants them to be this incredibly masculine person, and then they have their midwife and their nurse who recognise that they do have this feminine aspect and allows them to explore that part of their gender. Resonated with me somehow when I was younger, and there was something rather poetic about the prose and something striking about the novel that has stuck with me ever since. if memory serves me correctly, this was a great examination, not of just gender, but the pressures our parents can put on us and the people that our parents want us to be in comparison to the people that we want to be ourselves. And being a book about having the courage to create your own destiny and your own character and be your own person regardless of the possible pressures put on you by outside forces. I tell you, when I do these videos with stacks of books all around me, you have to be tentative getting around now. I have a maze of stacks of books to get through. The monk what does he care about? The monk cares about something. The monk cares little for the rule of work and prayer. Tell us about an unconventional character. Freya, from Freya by Anthony Quinn. So, I've not read the first book in this pseudo-connected series, Curtain Call, that follows Freya's father. This book starts in 1945 on VE Day, when Freya is 20. She has pushed back going to university due to the war, and she decides to join it at the same time as this younger girl. Freya refuses to accept that the world wants to return to the way it was, where the women are not respected for the help that they gave during the Second World War, and she refuses to be this cowed woman who is only thought to become a housewife. She wants to make her own achievements and get by in life without having it be decided for her by a man. This gets her into trouble at university. She becomes a journalist. She has bisexual love affairs, including one with another female protagonist, which isn't heartbreaking in its conclusion, but does have something of a bleak ending based on opposing ideals. And I appreciated the way that Quinn wrote that into the narrative, because sometimes these things can be quite irksome for me in their execution. Freya does defy convention and lives life the way that she wants to live. I don't know whether that comes from the fact that she has an artistic temperament or the fact that her father has inhabited the world for a while, but Freya was a delightful character to read about. And I say that having read the word delightful on the back, because that was exactly what it was. As soon as I saw that word, I was like, yes, whoever wrote that blurb, Vic Groskop, he got this book. Well, he figured out my opinion as well. Or he helped me. I don't know, I didn't have a thesaurus to hand.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Almost a week later, I discover that I actually missed one of the questions. And so editing Charlie is here. In a moment, you'll realise why it's quite apt that I am wearing the hooded blanket. Anyway, here's the question I forgot. The Friar is all about confession. Confess to us. Have you read the Bible, Torah, Quran, or other religious text all the way through? So see, the Friar. My father often says that I look like a monk when I walk around the house wearing the hooded blanket. And it does seem to be the thing that I wear when I'm just in the house doing nothing. It's become a house coat dressing gown sort of situation. I'm living in this, but it has been washed this week. I have not read any religious text all the way through. It was Steve Donahue who a few years ago said about the Western canon and reading specific religious texts in order to, I believe it was, recognise how techniques within the Bible or other religious texts had informed the way in which novelists write today in order to engage readers. It was something along those lines anyway. I had commented on that video. It's been years now. I tried to read the Bible a few times in my life, not for any religious reason, for I don't carry any religion myself. I held no umbrage towards those who do, but it's just not for me. I tried to read the Bible because when you go to school, it's a big part of your childhood. You get taught it whether you want to be taught it or not. You have to pray whether you want to pray or not. You have to sing hymns whether you want to sing hymns or not. And, well, you did when I was a child. I don't know whether things have changed now. I can remember being absolutely terrified of The Prince of Egypt, the film, when I was younger. And so I decided that I was going to try and read the Bible. and I read the entirety of Genesis, which in the grand scheme of things isn't that long really. Got to Exodus, got so far into Exodus, it scared me again. I put the book down and I never went back to it. I mean, this was nearly 10 years ago. I have since read Stephen King, but yeah, the Bible, Exodus, Moses, terrified me. Can I be doing it? I don't know whether I'll ever go back and try and read that. I did get a book a few years back again, but I have returned that to the shop, which was all about unravelling historical facts that are within the Bible to try and pinpoint when certain things may or may not have happened. It just scared me too much to continue reading. Maybe I'm a bit of a wimp. I don't know. Anyway, now that I've recorded this portion of the video, you can get back to your regularly scheduled viewing.
Back to life, back to reality.
9. The summoner is lecherous and a drunk who tries to sound more educated than he is. Tell us about a book that sounded better than it was. For me, I went with Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. I have a vlog about why I didn't much care for this book. So this book follows various trans characters, one of whom has detransitioned and his girlfriend has got pregnant. He contacts his ex-girlfriend, who is also trans, to see whether they would like to raise the child together. For me, the book didn't work because Tori Peters wished to talk about many aspects of trans life, which is perfectly fine, and I think that we ought to be seeing more of in fiction, and I appreciated that. However, everyone spoke in the same sort of college student discussion style, and nobody had their individual voice because Peters wanted to get these various points across. And personally, I think that there was an essay collection hidden within this novel, and that the two things should have been separate entities in order for the novel to live on its own, for these characters to be individuals, and for the story to actually get told, because the story gets forgotten in order that Peters can discuss all of these other very vital topics that ought to be discussed but perhaps could have been discussed better in a different medium. Then we have The Parson is Poor but Rich in Thought and Deeds. Tell us a book that gave you more than you expected. Balmain and Black by Diane Setterfield. I'd read The 13th Tale, I'd read Once Upon a River. This was the only one I had left to read, and one day in September I just thought it was raining outside, I'd wanted a day to sit and read and do nothing, and so I sat down with this book and just read it in a few hours. Just sat down, gone. I don't know what it was about that book. I had expected to be entirely bored by the tale of this man starting up his own undertaker's business in London in the Victorian era, but it was gothic, it was tense, and it was just perfect for an autumnal morning of sitting with a cup of tea and reading. It discussed death, it discussed grief, it discussed the ideas we have behind death and the way that we treat our dead and our loved ones upon such an event. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. 3 for 3 for Diane Setterfield, because she does not have a book that I have disliked. And then we have The Squire Stands for Youth, Beauty and Courting. What book did you fall in love with when you were a youth? I'll mention the one I've got written down, but as soon as I read the question aloud, I realised this was the wrong answer. I wrote down Magnus Powermouse by Dick King-Smith, because that is a book that has been in my head for a very long time, from when I first read it as a child, because I've never been able to find it since. It's never been stocked at my local Waterstones. I've not found it in any of the bookshops I go in. It's never been donated to the charity shop, even when we had a huge stack of Dick King-Smith books donated. This is a book in which a mouse gets his hands on some pig feed and ends up getting super strength. And I just remembered really liking that book. However, the book that I fell in love with when I was a child was The Bed and Breakfast Star by Jacqueline Wilson. I have this vivid memory now. I was in year 4, and back then our teacher used to allow us to choose books off the shelf that was in her classroom. And I saw this book, it was very brightly coloured, and so I picked it up and I went home and I read it in one sitting. And then I went back and subsequently read every Jacqueline Wilson book that my teacher had on those shelves. I had my mum take me to the library and I read every book that they had from Jacqueline Wilson. That was when my brother still lived at home, and every Saturday we'd walk down to the late shop together. And one day they had a book, and because it was cheap, my brother was kind enough to buy it for me. And that was The Bed and Breakfast Star. And I brought it home and I read it again. And this is one of those instances where Charlie read a book so much that it fell apart. This is the book that every single weekend, when I used to share a room with my brothers, I couldn't have the light on because the older brother would be going to work in the morning. So I'd have the light on from the landing and sit there reading by the light that was there. And I would read this book every single weekend. Every Saturday night, that book would come out, the light would be on the landing, and I would read that. It follows the character of Elsa, whose mother has remarried, and they're living in this bed and breakfast. And as with most Jacqueline Wilson books, she's feeling ostracised by her family because she feels like she doesn't fit, because while she has her mother, her father isn't there, and she's having to deal with the disconnection between a stepfather and these two young children who she feels like she can't properly align herself with. I ended up having to get rid of my copy a few years ago because it had completely fallen apart, and also don't think that at the age I am I would read that book and appreciate it. Then we have The Clerk Says Little, but his words are wise and morally virtuous. Tell us about a short book that made you a better person. There is not a single book on this planet that has ever made me a better person. I am the most boring, worst, grumpy person upon this planet. There is not a single nice bone in my body. I'm currently on a villain origin story that is not about to change, and I'm sorry about that. I'm not sorry about that.
I hate most people.
But the book I've mentioned here is The Outsider by Albert Camus. This is a short book. I can't remember the protagonist's name, but I remember seeing this man get in trouble for just speaking the truth because people saw this truth as being incredibly weird and the wrong thing to say, and he didn't school himself into how to be seen as better by society, and they wanted him to grieve in a particular way, and because he didn't, they took that the wrong way, and every single one of his actions was taken the wrong way despite the fact that it was truthful, and they saw something malicious in that truth. And yeah, I can just remember smiling about that book. I was the only one at uni who'd read it in a class once, and the tutor didn't understand why I was just grinning about the book, and I just said it's not because of the content of the book, it's just because I think that it was so brilliantly done, and I think that it did actually capture humanity and us as a people and society as a whole incredibly well. The man of law upholds justice and knows the laws by heart. What is a book you could not imagine rereading? The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I have a vlog of that book as well. I threw it across the room during Victober last year. So that one. The Manciple provides the food. Recommend a series you think is good from the first book to the last. The Live Ship Traders trilogy by Robin Hobb, which are Ship of Magic, The Mad Ship, and Ship of Destiny. Indeed, I would recommend the entire realm of the Elderlings by this author. However, that's not necessarily a series that is good from start to end. They do improve as you go on, but Assassin's Apprentice for me, when I read about Bookkeep and the castle there, it felt so homely, and I don't know, whenever I returned to Bookkeep in that series, it almost felt like a very homely presence to be in, despite all of the catastrophic events that happen there, all of the torture that happens to our protagonist. Assassin's Quest is an incredibly difficult book to read because of how depressing that gets, but all I have in terms of Robin Hobb's books is this sense of being taken on emotional journeys, always having great allegory. In here, we have some great feminist allegory about the slave trade, the way in which we will destroy first and ask questions later, oftentimes when it is too late. Robin Hobb is a writer who is constantly exploring the consequences of actions that happen in previous books, and as a reader, you'll think something is seemingly inconsequential, but it will always come to something. And honestly, if I was recommending any series for you to enter into this world with, despite the fact that the Farseer trilogy is first, I would go with the Live Ship Traders trilogy if you just wanted brilliant family saga, brilliant fantasy, brilliant allegory. This is my favourite fantasy series, and just these 3 books on their own are humongously fantastic. The merchant deals in furs and cloth and is powerful and wealthy. Recommend a book with a powerful message or theme, and I'm going with The Prettiest Star by Sickles. I had to read this for the BookTube prize last year, and this is a short, incredibly emotional book in which a young gay man returns home during the 1980s AIDS epidemic to die at home, basically. It is an incredible portrayal of the attitudes of the time and the way in which gay men were treated, people with AIDS were treated, and it is a tiny book of heartbreak due to the lack of familial understanding, the lack of understanding in general, the behaviours of people. It is emotional and it's both emotional and awful to read at the same time. The Shipman is a wine-stealing rascal. Tell us about a side character who steals the spotlight. I can't pick it up now because it's at the bottom of the stack, but Yenti in the Books of Jacob, because we begin with Yenti. We begin with this woman who swallows this incantation. And from then, whenever this character appears, it's almost as this spiritual, all-seeing eye over the entire narrative. I see you. Her very short snippets can either be a page or 2 at a time. Just steal the story away. They are written with humour. They provide this fantastical metaphysical aspect. I was a fan. 17. The physician knows what ails you and can cure you. Tell us about a book you consider a comfort read. At Bertram's Hotel by Agatha Christie. Now, admittedly, I'm more likely to watch the Geraldine McEwen adaptation nowadays than actually read the book, because I did reread it a few years ago, and in rereading it, I recognised that whilst it might be a favourite of mine based on the nostalgia I have of always watching the Joan Hickson film with my grandparents when I was younger, it isn't the best story in the world. But I think that removing Jane Marple from St Mary Mead and sending her into London and seeing how she navigates life there is an incredibly good thing. It's one of those that inspires me to write my own murder mystery set in a hotel one day. At Bertram's Hotel is the reason that Bertram Sterling got his name in An Heir to Murder, because I had to pay homage to the fact that this is my favourite Agatha Christie. And whenever you're having one of those sad days, or just one of those languid, lackadaisical days, it's all right just to sit down with a Agatha Christie, because any Agatha Christie will do, but specifically for me it's at Bertram's Hotel, and just while some time away. You can usually read them in about 2 hours, and they're just comforting. And I think that's the purpose of cosy crime and golden age of crime. Yes, there is that dark aspect of the murder there, but for the most part, they are going to feel cosy. The Franklin is not a vassal or a noble, but a free man. Recommend a book about freedom in any form. The Black Flamingo by Dean Atter. This is a book that I no longer own because I decided that teenagers and children might be able to get more out of this book than I can. I read this a couple of years ago now, and the protagonist here is a young queer man who is exploring their gender throughout the narrative, and in doing so discovers a drag. Told in a poetical form, however, whether it is actually poetic or not and just enjambment, that's for somebody else to decide. I think that this is freedom of gender and freedom of expression within a book, and it's recommended now. The Reeve is believable on the outside but lies on the inside. What book was different than what the blurb led you to believe? The Lollipop Shoes by Joanne Harris. I had to get Joanne Harris in here somewhere, and basically I hadn't read Chocolat when I was younger, so I didn't know who Joanne Harris was. I wanted the Rune Marks books for Christmas. My parents got me that, and seeing this on the table at Waterstones, they decided that they would get it for me, because it was the same author. And when I looked at it, I was like, this is just standard women's fiction. Please forgive 14-year-old Charlie or 15-year-old Charlie. Just forgive this younger Charlie. He was a dickhead. The Lollipop Shoes from the back just talks about Jan and her daughters living above a chocolate shop, and this woman in Lollipop Shoes coming, and everything begins to change. And I just thought, oh, this is just going to be standard like women's fiction, and it's not going to be for me. But everyone was in the toilet one morning, so I had to lie in bed and wait, and this book was by my bed, so I opened it. And that first line captured me. It is a relatively little known fact that over the course of a single year, about 20 billion letters are delivered to the dead. This became the book of 2008, I believe. Yep, I got it Christmas 2007, so I was 15, and read it a few times in 2008. I even wrote a piece of fan fiction for it for an English language class because I was that enamoured with the story. And I've continued to enjoy Joanna Harris's books since then, especially the Vianna Rocha series. But the Lollipop Shoes sees the characters from the first book hiding away, and someone comes along and decides that she is going to try and steal Vianne's identity. Now, whether that was metaphorical or not, who knows? But I think that one of the things that Harris often writes about in her books is the importance of having your own identity and refusing to lose that, and how easy it can be to lose identity based on outside forces. Again, we could say that Vianna Rocha is one of the is a strong female character as well. If you wanted to explore her books, you have Chocolat, the Lollipop Shoes, which in America is called The Girl with No Shadow. Then you have Peaches for Monsieur Le Carré, which in America is called Peaches for Father Francis. And then you have the final book, which was The Strawberry Thief. So you've got no excuses now. I've told you all the titles. I've told you the alternative titles. Get on it. The Ploughman is good-hearted and faithful. What book do you read over and over again? I haven't done this in a while, but the book that I reread over and over again is Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. A few years ago, I had a very big period of depression. I called it the period of unfathomable sadness, and it reached a point in the January of 2016 where everything just kind of came to a standstill, and I decided to stop reading. I did a video called Giving Up on Writing, in which I stopped writing. I got this, and I got Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And both of these books came into my life at the correct time. Furiously Happy helped me laugh at what I was experiencing, and Big Magic helped me realise to take this break. And when I did this, and I started to rise out of the sadness then, you see. And then whenever I started feeling a little bit glum, I would return to Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson, because it felt as though I was reading a book by someone who was experiencing what I was experiencing, or that you're able to acknowledge that you're feeling a certain type of way, but you can still move through life with these feelings. And Furiously Happy always does that. It always makes me feel happy. And so for a period of time, this was the first book I was reading every January. And I think it's probably 2 years now since I read it. I have such fond memories of this book. The guildsmen are 5 men who act as a unit and stand for brotherhood or sisterhood. Recommend a book with a strong ensemble cast of characters. Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. This has become a video in which I'm sharing favourite books with you. And I mean, it gives you an idea of what type of reader I am. Lonesome Dove is one of my favourite books. I plan to reread it. I want to reread the rest of the Larry McMurtry I have on my shelves, actually. But basically, Augustus McCrae and W.F. Cal put together this group of people to travel across the country. What's it called? Oh, I can't remember. Either way, they're calling it an epic journey across the American West. This has a huge cast of characters. It's basically an entire community moving this cattle, and it is epic in scope, fantastic, insightful, beautiful prose, with well-drawn characters that you want. You want your characters to feel real, and you want to have an almost emotional connection to characters, and that is what happens here. It's a rather stupendous novel, and I'm always thrilled when I see more readers picking it up and getting to see these characters and recognise that this is not a typical Western. Then we have The Cook Makes the Food That Feeds You. Tell us about a book that feeds your soul. The Miseducation of Evie Epworth by Matson Taylor is one that I always call a Charlie book. This is set in the Yorkshire Dales at the start of the 1960s and follows 16-year-old Evie Epworth, who is at a crossroads in life. Her father wants to remarry someone who is definitely the very definition of a wicked stepmother, and then somebody comes into her life that helps her recognise what she wishes to do with her own life. This is comedic. This showed all of the strong northern women that I like to see represented in fiction. This felt like a love story to Yorkshire, to the north of England, and to these northern women that we've often seen popularised in television and on screen, but it gave them more nuance, which you're able to do in fiction. There is a big thing of women being at the heart of the family, and I like to see it represented here. The characters within here, I felt like I knew, I felt like I'd met them before. The humour was there, the references to things from the time were just brilliant, and there was stuff here that I recognised from my own research, and there was stuff here that I'd missed in my own research for the Doris books. And honestly, I've continued to say that if you've ever liked one of my books, then you need to read The Miseducation of Evie Epworth. And the next book, All About Evie, set 10 years after this novel, is due out in July. So I'm most looking forward to that. Then we have The Yeoman Serves You. Tell us about a book that served its purpose, that did what you wanted it to do. It wasn't great, but wasn't bad. The Thirst by Yo Nesbo. I can't remember who translated this. It might have been Don Bartlett, but it could have been another one of the translators, because the translator did change, and I preferred the translator's work that I was reading previously than what we've got now. However, when it comes to Nesbo's books, I read them for a thriller. They are one and done type books. I'm looking for a thrilling narrative that you don't really have to apply much thought to. It's going to have a generic journey, and it's going to give you what you want, and then you get out the narrative, and I donate the books back to the charity shop. I don't despise them, I don't dislike them, I generally like them, and I appreciate the journey, but it's never something I think I'm going to go back and reread. Once I'm done with those books, I'm done with those books. The Second Nun talks about a saint's life in her tale. What book do you praise often? The Trouble with Goats and Sheep by Joanne Cannon. I have constantly held this book to high esteem since November 2016 when I first read it. This book is fantastic, similar to Matson Taylor. This book is a Charlie book. It's a community in England in 1976, and it has a bit of this aspect where there's a mystery as to events that happened 10 years prior to the novel, and follows Grace and Tilly as they try to solve the mystery of the missing, what's her name now? Mrs. Creasy. It just captures people incredibly well. I said that Joanna Cannon reminded me of Alan Bennett in the writing of this, because there is something compassionate and sympathetic about the prose, but it doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of humanity. And so once again, you have a novel where it's not necessarily seemingly inconsequential, but innocuous. That's the word I'm looking for. Something can seem like nothing really, but there's darker meaning beneath it. And it's a humorous, light-hearted tale that I thoroughly adore and recommend all of the time. Joanna Cannon is a favourite writer of mine, writing books that I find particularly fantastic and engrossing. And honestly, I cannot sing this one's praises high enough. I mention it regularly. Another one that I can't believe it's been 6 years since I read. Well, it will be 6 years later this year. Saying that, A Tidy Ending by Joanna Cannon came out last week, and you need to get that one. Definitely need to get that one. If only for the fact that it mentions a charity shop. And I work in a charity shop, so it's like even more of my life colliding with Joanna Cannon's work. And then we have The Nun's Priest is witty and doesn't take himself too seriously. Recommend a book that has a funny or witty main character. I was going to recommend my own book then. Doris, links in the description. Because they are comedies. But then I looked down, and who did I see? But The Rabbi's Cat. This is a graphic novel written by Johann Spar. I can never remember who translated it. Translated by Alexis Siegel and Anjali Singh. So basically, the Rabbi's cat is this cat here who gains the ability to talk. And the first thing he does is tell a lie. And this cat is just humorous. He follows the journeys of the humans around him and tells them with this very witty voice. And it discusses the Bible, it discusses religion, it discusses the way that religions can be somewhat contentious. Indeed, the cat does get into an argument with Rabbi in the beginning of this book. It's been a while since I read it. I couldn't tell you when even, but it's one that always lingers with me for having this sort of art style that I can't really say what it's like, but either way, Algeria, French, cat that speaks and is a bit witty. It'll do. Then we have 26, which is to tag some BookTube pilgrims. Now, if you didn't know, I'm a bit out of touch. Well, most people did know I was out of touch. And I couldn't really think of who to tag here because I've been doing that awful thing again where I've not been commenting on people's videos, I've just been adding them to my other folks' videos playlist. The one person who I thought I could tagged me to do this video anyway. So I wrote down 3 names and maybe I'll add a 4th. So the 4th one I'll add and go from there is Emma of Emma Rosen Books. I considered mentioning Ben of Doom Antidote because, you know, he's what sent a lot of people this way in the first place, but I also don't know whether he does tags. Dane of Dane Reads, Sophie of Redhead Reading, and A.B. Frank. That's got to be the list. That will have to be the list. I'm definitely missing some people off there. Some people who might be disappointed with me and despise me even more. But guess what? I work in retail. I get despised on a daily basis. Well, a regular basis. I'm not there daily. Anyway, after nearly 55 minutes, I'm going to call this a day. Them's the books. Thank you to Emily of Novel Novels for tagging me in this video. I hope that it has been quite informative to you. Thank you to AJ of AJ Dunn Reads and Writes for creating this tag. If you have read any of these books and would like to discuss them, then please feel free to do so in the comments. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.